But ignore that, and we're just going to put the business again on the regular board meeting if you don't get through it in committee.
And we're live. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting for Wednesday, September 28th. Welcome to the meeting. I'd like to begin, as always, by acknowledging that we're gathered on the traditional ancestral territories of Coast Salish First Nations. We have one alternate director with us this morning. That's Director Manhas. He's in for Director Marsh, who is attending an electronic conference. So with that, I'd like to call the meeting to order. We have an agenda before us, and I would turn to Mr. Robbins. We have a couple of late items to add under new business. Mr. Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, under Section 10 new business, we distributed two late staff reports, one with regards to Kerwood Lydell and another with regards to budget amendments. And with that, a motion to adopt the agenda with those additions.
That's moved. Seconded. I'm not seeing any. Oh, there we are. Thank you. All in favor? And opposed? That carries. All right. That takes us to no business arising. Public input period. I gather we have some folks here who want to speak. I'm not sure. Oh, we should probably adopt the minutes first. I'm sorry. Adoption of the minutes is moved and seconded. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all in favor? And opposed? That carries. Now we move to public input period. Do the folks in the room have any public input? I understand there's some folks who have signed in via WebEx who'd like to speak to us. But if you're here, we'll give precedence. Come on up to the microphone, ma'am, and state your name and address. And the policy for public input is 3 minutes maximum per speaker to a maximum of 15 minutes, so 5 speakers unless the board waives that. So go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. I would like to speak to the telecommunications antenna structure policy. I am generally in favor of this policy. However, I do have a couple of concerns. One is with attachment B, the map that was provided. It is zoomed in and screenshot so the public can't see the full coverage of it. And so I was wondering, does it show the current location of antenna structures? And perhaps by way of a second map, could the general areas where TELUS could install antenna structures be provided to the CVRD for consideration? Public notification area. This is a deviation from what is normal for the CVRD policy for notification to neighboring property owners, in that it goes 300 meters from the external limits of the structure, including any guy wires, fencing, and landscaping. And I'm just wondering why this is different. This could substantially reduce the notification catchment area in rural areas. And if the proposal is for CVRD to place a structure on CVRD land, would the public be notified? And number 4 for me is a matter of record for the CVRD is usually when there's public input, that forms part of the public record, and I don't believe that the TELUS procedure allows for that. So will this policy provide that information to the board so that the people know, that the board knows that the people who are most affected would be made aware? And I don't wish to see this policy delayed at all. I think it's very important to have, and that it gives the CVRD more of a voice in a federally adopted procedure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before you sit down, staff would need your name for the record.
I'm sorry. My name's Susan Kaufman, and I live in Salem.
Thank you, ma'am.
Out of practice.
All right. Anybody else in the room that needs to provide public input? Seeing none, I would turn to IT. Do we have any folks with their hands up in the virtual world? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you, ma'am. Come on up. And please start with your name, and you have 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm Dorothea Siegler. So, Mayor Sebring, is this about the cell policy?
This is the public input period where you can speak to any item on the agenda, including that one.
Oh, okay. So, I just wanted to say that that means myself and the community, and you folks are in a conundrum because there have been large-scale studies done, for example, in 2018 by the National Toxicology Program in the United States, a 10-year study, and also another 10-year study by the Ramazzini Institute, which is a cancer institute in Italy. And in the press conference from the study from Italy, the lead scientist said 3 things. Microwave radiation is strongly carcinogenic, and no new infrastructure should be erected given what we now know. And she said also Wi-Fi should be turned off when it's not in use. So then Dr. Ron Melnick, the lead toxicologist from the 10-year study in the United States, said that, now we know that there are serious concerns. And so this is not new news. There are thousands of studies, very good information from scientists and toxicologists. The telecommunications companies, as I understand, own the media. So I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, that that's why this information is not being distributed in the mainstream media. So, however, we are in a conundrum because in 2015, Health Canada asked for a standing committee on health to report on this. And they made 9 recommendations, one of which was that the government should be alerting people to the concerns about microwave radiation. And there were 8 other salient points. So this information is there. The lead person at Health Canada at the time, forget the woman's name, basically poo-pooed the report that the standing committee had done and the 9 recommendations. So we are in a conundrum because we have come to you over a period of a decade, and after that, personally, I kind of gave up because we never heard back from you, and I'm wondering in what kind of a situation you would be inspired to protect the community, because the government has said, very important point, that we can't comment on any health considerations. Now, given that the cancer rate 2 years ago...
Ma'am, your 3 minutes is up.
Thank you.
The
I'll
light is
finish
red.
my sentence, please.
Okay, thank you.
That the cancer rate is 1 in 4 in Canada. That was 2 years ago.
You finished your sentence. Thank you very much. Your time's up.
No, I have not finished my sentence.
Those minutes.
Your time is up. Please resume your
You know,
seat.
we were given 24 hours notice for this meeting.
The agenda was published last Friday. Anybody else in the room that needs to speak before we go to the virtual? Go ahead, sir.
I would like to,
Come on up to the microphone. There's people virtually that need to be able to hear you as well. Your name, please.
my name is Ben Verdoen, and I would like to give my time to Dorothea,
That's not done.
because this
That is not
matter
on.
is very important, and you cannot let her after 3 minutes and shut her down.
Actually, yes, I can. That's the
You
policy.
can, but you shouldn't.
Well, I just did.
This is,
I'm not giving, if you want to add to the discussion, go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
she is very knowledgeable, and I think this panel should listen to her. And if you refuse,
She has 3
then I
minutes.
think this is a very bad thing to do.
I'm
Because the
sorry.
knowledge that she can bring to you can be very
Sir,
important for your decision-making.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry you feel that way, but that's the ruling of the chair. Anybody else in the room that needs to speak before we go to virtual? I would turn to IT. Oh, we got somebody else getting up. Come on up, ma'am. Your name, please? And
Donna
you have 3
Houston.
minutes.
It's Donna Houston. And I just wish to say that I hope you are aware of the responsibility that you are carrying for the health of this community. Now, anybody who is responsible for the health of this community needs to do very deep research to make sure what they are saying is okay is truly fine and will be good for the health of the community. That's all I want to say.
Thank you very
Pay
much.
attention.
Thank you very much. Anybody else in the room? I would turn to IT. Do we have anybody virtually who needs to speak? Oh, we got somebody else in the room. Come on up.
Sorry,
No problem. Your name?
I'm Caitlin Wills. And I guess really I'm just emphasizing what you just heard from her. This affects everyone. It's not just us, it's all of you and your children and grandchildren. This is a very, very important decision. And if you know anything about Dr. Barry Trower, or you don't, I suggest you do some research with him because he's an expert in the field and he will tell you exactly what 5G is. No uncertain terms. Expert. Please do your due diligence for yourselves and all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Anybody else in the room? I'm going to wait a minute here because people keep popping up when I go to IT. I'm not. All right, IT, do we have anybody virtually with their hand raised?
Mr. Chair, I know that a number of the public have joined us, and so if those that are listening from their computers, if you could raise your hand so we could, the chair could recognize you if you'd like to speak during this public input period.
Actually, I don't even know how to get to that on my screen. Could you recognize them?
I
for me,
will,
Patrick?
most definitely, but I don't see anybody raising their hands, and I know that a number of people had requested, and I have 5 names: Laureen Benoit, Matt Hess, Mary Forbes, Julian Jackman, and Marjam Jackman. Again, just so that we can organize our meeting, if you could raise your hand. I see a number of the screens that are on there, but no one is raising their hand, Mr. Chair.
All right. Do we, I know at North Cowichan, one of the things we do is IT gives a brief description of how to raise your hand if you're logging in virtually, because it's not clear to some people. They don't participate in this format that readily.
Can I just interject for a minute? Some of the names that you've just indicated are from Thetis Island, and there was a bit of miscommunication between that area, as they already have their own antenna policy, and I think that they may have put their names in and it was corrected later for them, and they may not have removed their names.
Thank you, Director Smith. That's appreciated. Okay, not seeing any hands raised.
Just one moment, Mr. Chair. Just
go ahead.
reading the chat here as well, and somebody had indicated that IT chat is disabled. It's not, we're not using the chat function, so we're relying on your audiovisual equipment that you're using to connect via WebEx and the ability to use your built-in microphone and your video to provide video and/or audio for this meeting. So again, for those that are joining us, it's through your video and your audio. And if you're joining us via the WebEx, on the bottom of your screen, there should be a series of tabs that provide you with your mute, unmute, your video, your share, record, and there's a little icon that you might see. It's a little hand.
Looks like this.
And so if you, I'll demonstrate myself. I'm going to raise my hand, and you can see that I've raised my hand in my screen if you're watching via video. Director Stone just did the same thing.
And if you're logged in by phone, I believe it's *3 to raise your hand. I know that's what it is at North Couch.
Correct.
Mohan says there's an audio problem.
She had just indicated that our audio is very low here within, on our microphones.
All right. So with all that, do we have any hands raised from participants?
Can I just say there is something wrong with the audio?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's not very clear from your end, Al.
You're having trouble hearing us? Is it a volume issue?
It sounds like someone has their mic on and that you're not using your mic.
Yeah,
That
it
it's
sounds a
just
bit
this
muffled.
faint, muffled in the distance, and also with Mr. Robbins.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, we're using our
Sorry?
mics, and is this any better?
Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, testing.
I'll be so glad when we're done with this platform.
Anybody joining our, that's a little better, we're told. They're still looking for some more volume.
Some people have their mic on too.
Not in here, they don't. I'm looking around, all the mics are turned off.
The chair and I both have our microphones on just for some
I
audio
was just
testing.
wondering if the podium mic was turned off yet.
Yeah, it's off.
Correct.
Podium mic is off.
Is there anything better?
It's slightly better when you talk closer to the mic, but it's still echoing, or it's not quite an echo, but there's definitely something wrong with it. I don't know if restarting it or what's done in the past, but it's not normal.
IT is
Yeah,
testing.
Sierra's incoming is fine. It's you guys in the conference room, which sounds a bit strange.
I've moved the mic as close as I dare without, spitting on it. Is that any better?
Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3, testing.
Al, I think there's a volume control on your mic.
Yeah, I know.
Try that.
Yeah. No, that's actually for the speaker, not for the mic.
Testing, testing. Do I have any thumbs up? Nope.
No thumbs up.
Yeah, it sounds pretty good. Let's give it a go.
All right. Okay, so let's return to the business. Sorry about the technological interruption. We don't have anybody with their hand raised virtually, correct?
Yes?
Actually, I can't hear the chair.
Oh, go ahead, ma'am.
This is fine, but the chair is bad.
We'll speak as closely to our microphones and as clearly and slowly as we can.
Slow, loud in here now.
Yeah.
I'm going to recommend a 10-minute recess, Mr. Chair. See if it is.
I've had a recommendation from Director Stone for a 10-minute recess so we can sort out this technology. So with the consent of the board, we'll do that and we'll reconvene.
I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. But it shows Tech Manhas is unmuted on his screen. Don't know.
Okay, we're live and IT is still working on something on the laptop at the podium. I think we'll let them continue to do that, and I'll turn to Mr. Robbins and ask, is there anybody else in the interim that figured out how to raise their hand for public input virtually?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our apologies, everybody. And I still don't see any people that have joined us via WebEx with a raised hand. Again, on the bottom of your screen, there's a series of tabs One that if you hover your mouse cursor over, it's raise your hand. I just clicked mine just as an example. Mr. Chair, I'm afraid that I don't see anybody raising their hands through WebEx.
Okay, then we'll move on in the agenda. Before we get to public input period, it's my understanding that Director Stone wants to vary the order of the agenda. Director Stone, I'd invite you to make that motion now.
Yeah, it might be the chair's prerogative, but I just thought it would make sense to move R12, the antenna structure policy, to the next item following the delegation.
All right. And we do that as a courtesy to the folks in the room who came to watch this discussion. That way you don't have to wait around for potentially 2 hours until we get to this. So with the unanimous consent of the board, unless I see objections, I'm going to accept that amendment to the order of the agenda. Not seeing any objections, we will move on in the agenda to public input period and, or pardon me, to delegations. And Mr. Wakeham is going to introduce our delegation, and I think he's got another little announcement to make as well. Mr. Wakeham, welcome to the meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, directors. I just have a quick introduction here. I'm pleased to introduce our new transit assistant, which is Selena Hayes, who's been with us about 6 weeks. And Selena, if you can turn your camera on just so the directors can see you.
She did, and she's waving.
Excellent. So Selena's going to be working closely with Rochelle and our BC Transit partners as Rochelle transitions her duties of the day-to-day items, which is our bus stop maintenance and our public inquiries, marketing and transit education initiatives, and dealing with our ticket vendors. That'll be all transitioned over to Selena, and that will allow Rochelle more time to concentrate on her planning duties, which will be related to the Transit Future Action Plan, which we'll speak about in a second, and our annual expansion plans. A little bit about Selena. She's got a great deal of experience working in the transit service industry. If you don't know, she worked with the Cowichan Valley School District for the past 27 years and most recently held the position of transportation manager for the last 5 years. She's also served as the Director of Transportation on the very successful 2018 BC Summer Games. So we're really happy that Selena's joined the CVRD and the Transit Division. Will greatly benefit from her knowledge and of the region, especially, and our transit roadways, her vast experience dealing with our municipal operation managers and transportation service providers. And Selena's a longtime Cowichan resident, and she just recently moved to Lake Cowichan. So if I may, Mr. Chair, just a quick introduction here on the first presentation by BC Transit on the Transit Future Plan. So I just wanted to point out the presentation is an abbreviated version of the full plan, which is also included as an attachment in the first staff report R1. The PowerPoint documents look the same, but the presentation is about a third less. We were cognizant of the committee's time today, and so it's about 10 pages less than the full report. The focus of the Transit Future Plan again is, the Transit Future Action Plan is an update to our 25-year visionary Transit Future Plan, which was adopted 10 years ago in 2012. So it's not an overhaul to the plan, but it rather identifies the necessary changes and improvements, and it's ultimately a planning guide for the CVRD to use for the transit service investments over the next 5 years. So the plan connects nicely to the rolling 3-year expansion plan process, which will also be discussed today under R2. So with that, we have 2 BC Transit folks with us today, Seth Wright, who is the Government Relations Manager, and Aaron Thompson, who is a BC Transit Planner. They will take us through the Transit Future Action Plan, the work that went into it, and the outcomes. And they'll be sharing their screen to provide the presentation.
All right, so I'd welcome both Aaron and Seth to the meeting. And to preserve bandwidth, because I know some people are a little challenged in that this morning, including Director Wilson, I'd recommend that we all turn our cameras off while the presentation is underway. And I would turn the floor over to Mr. Thompson and Mr. Wright. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you for the introduction as well, Jim. My name is Mr. Wright. I presented to you before, you may recall. It's a privilege to present today the culmination of the last couple of years of planning work of our planning team on this Transit Future Plan. A lot of work and a lot of public engagement has gone into this plan, so it's an exciting moment to bring it to the board today, and Aaron will present that presentation, and perhaps while he brings it up, I'll just remind you my role as Government Relations Manager is to work with your staff in the transit portfolio and ensure that there's a good conduit and two-way flow of information. But I also serve to provide any transit information to the elected officials, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have today or indeed after today. I will stick around, not just for this presentation, but for the 3 agenda items afterwards, and I'm happy to supplement and provide BC Transit's answer to any questions you may have. Thanks so much, and with that, I'll hand it over to Aaron Thompson.
Aaron, your mic is muted.
Sorry about that. So my name's Aaron Thompson. I'm a transit planner with BC Transit, and I will be going through this abridged version of the Transit Future Action Plan. I'd first like to take some time to acknowledge that the Cowichan Valley sits on the traditional territory of the Kwotsun, Malahat, Suba-Set, Halat, Penelakut, Shermanus, Liaxin, Pawkechin, Ditodat, and Pashidat First Nations. We are grateful to live, work, and play on the traditional lands. And I'm presenting from Victoria, which is in the traditional territory of the Songhees and Esquimalt people. So just going briefly through kind of transit ridership today. So overall, we've been seeing transit ridership growing since 2012 up to 2021. We were seeing ridership grow about 6%. That, of course, was negatively impacted by the COVID pandemic, but we still have seen ridership continue to grow overall. We see about 479,000 rides a year with 40,000 annual service hours. And the most recent change to the system, which I'm sure you're all aware of, is the introduction of the 70 NCX, which is the name of the Cowichan Express service. So a bit more about Cowichan today. So currently, most of the service is centered around the city of Duncan and the adjoining North Cowichan. Most services connect, in Duncan or around there, connecting from like the smaller and more rural communities to the center of Duncan. So that's kind of how the system is set up. We also provide those connections to 3 different ferry terminals along the coast that connect over to Salt Spring Island, Brentwood Bay, and Deas Island and Penelakut Island. Going over a bit of the engagement that we did. So over the last year or so, we've reached out to a variety of stakeholders and the public. They get their feedback, which helped inform the priorities in this plan. So in total, we had 562 total comments received through our engagement process. We heard from a variety of residents across the valley, majority coming from Duncan, followed by Ladysmith / Saltaire, and then following behind that is Lake Cowichan. So some of the key findings, we found that 33% of the respondents don't take transit, while 13% take transit just a few times a month, and over 8% were regular transit users. Majority of people who responded were adults, followed by at 64.9%, followed by seniors at 29%, and 4.8% as students, with a very small 0.5% as with children 12 and under. So kind of just the high level of what we heard through the engagement. Expanding the service area was identified as the top item for encouraging more transit use, with Saltaire being the most commonly identified area to expand transit. Frequency improvements during the weekdays was also highly desired. Better connections between those local routes and those interregional routes to allow for those time connections and transfers. We saw some strong support for a new Duncan / North Cowichan circulator route, and desire to improve the frequency of service in the South Cowichan area, as well as reducing the amount of travel time. This is a bit about some of our ongoing engagement method information. So we have the Voice of the Rider program, which was more recently launched, and we will be continuing to engage with Indigenous communities. So yeah, getting into some of the priorities, which is kind of the real body of this report. These are the service improvements we'll be looking to make over the next few years, depending on available resources. So this is just a high-level snapshot of them, but I'll go over the priorities in a bit more detail. So the immediate priorities are those ones that we've identified currently in the transit improvement process, which you have on your agenda later today. That's looking, and these would hopefully be implemented next year. This is looking at improving the service frequency on the Route 5 and also introducing Saturday service, introducing Saturday service for the Route 7X for the Cowichan Lake Express, and adding one additional trip on the number 6 Crofton-Chemainus. Looking a bit further out, we'd be looking at starting a redesign of the South Cowichan routes to address the concerns we heard by the public about the need for faster, frequent service while maintaining coverage, which is a difficult thing to reconcile. So we are going to be undertaking a local area transit plan for the South Cowichan area. We're hoping to start work on that in the new year, the early new year, and then we'll be getting more public feedback on that and developing additional concepts to as we move forward towards implementation. We'll be looking at changing some of the core routes in Duncan/North Cowichan to provide a higher quality of transit service. So at the bottom left of the screen, you can see that new circular route. This really provides that east-west connection throughout the city of Duncan, connecting to the current hospital site and just connecting throughout that east-west. And then on the right, we have a map that shows a new routing that would go north-south between Cowichan Commons and Village Green Mall, and providing some additional north-south service. Both these routes would be bi-directional and would require a bit of a shuffling of resources. So the current Route 3 Quamachin would be discontinued and its resources reallocated to these new routes. There's some of the details about the proposed service levels. We're looking at a two-phase approach with this improvement, with phase 1 adding a small amount of additional hours, and then to create a base level of service, and then looking at phase 2 to increase that level of service to from like 120-minute frequency to a 60-minute frequency on weekdays. The other priority is, the next priority is, of course, looking at reallocating some of the service on the 66 Victoria/Duncan. With the COVID pandemic, we've seen a shift in commuting habits, with ridership on the commuter services being reduced. And it presents an opportunity to look at reallocating one of those morning trips on the 66 Victoria/Duncan to later in the morning for to allow for non-commuters to travel to and from Victoria. It also would potentially allow for connections between the Route 66 and the Route 70 NCX to allow people to essentially go from Nanaimo all the way to Victoria. There is also a possibility that that peak demand for those commuter services will return. So we are looking at implementing this as a pilot until it can be determined if there's a higher demand for commuter and non-commuter transit services.
Mr. Wright, I'm going to interrupt you. There's a time limit on delegation presentations, and you just hit it.
Sorry.
It's okay. How much longer do you have? I think I'm just going to entertain a motion from the board to extend the time to allow you time to finish. That's been moved and seconded in the room here. If I have any objections from the board, please just crack your mic and say oppose, otherwise I'll assume that that's a unanimous consent for the motion. Not hearing anyone, the motion passes unanimously. You can proceed, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, so continuing on, with then we're looking at introductions of service to Saltaire. Again, this is something we heard from the public of wanting these new areas of service, and Saltaire was the most commonly heard. So we'd be looking at changing the 6 Crofton to provide that service to Saltaire. We're looking at improving those transfer opportunities. So this is a lot of a scheduling exercise to really focus on those time connections throughout some of the major points in the Cowichan Valley. As part of this, we'd be also looking at maintaining our service reliability to allow for those time connections. So this could be a continual investment in service hours to maintain that service reliability moving forward. And kind of the lastly of our kind of short-term priorities is looking at on-demand service. BC Transit is currently investigating on-demand and starting a pilot in Kelowna. And based off that information, we'll be looking at exploring on-demand service in other communities. And we've identified a few areas in the Cowichan Valley, which could be good targets for that, including Arbutus Ridge, looking at that local Ladysmith service, and looking at service in North Oyster, as well as maybe looking at changing the existing on-demand paratransit service for the Yubu and Honeymoon Bay connector routes to go to on-demand model. This is already in the tip slide you'll see earlier, but these are some of the custom service improvements we'd be looking at in the short term. And then looking at, again, the infrastructure priorities over the next 5 years. These are mostly looking at studies to support infrastructure changes, looking at a potential for a transit exchange in Ladysmith to support both those interregional and local transit routes. Looking at the hospital transit exchange with the development of a new hospital site, we'd be looking at having essentially a small transit exchange there to support transfers and have some capacity there for buses. Looking at a creation of a central transit exchange in Duncan in the vicinity of the train station. Again, this is at the kind of looking at studies and possible locations. And then looking at parking rides throughout the Cowichan Valley. And there could be opportunities of working, combining this study with some of the work the regional district and the NIMO is doing on their south end, combining with the north end of Cowichan. So there's some opportunities there. And then finally, looking at just continued investment in bus stop infrastructure through the shelter improvement program or the minor betterments program funding if it's on the highway. So yeah, wrapping this up, the investment strategy is really looking at about 9,000 annual hours over, say, the next 5 years, with additional 5 vehicles added to the transit fleet and improvements to infrastructure and studies for those infrastructure improvements. Moving forward and how we actually look to implement this, so we continue to monitor the performance of the transit system on an annual basis and after major service changes. And then we plan for our service improvements with the 3-year transit improvement process, which is updated on an annual basis for the board's consideration. So, and then finally, I'd just like to acknowledge all the input and work we received from the public and some of these key stakeholders identified below. Without their feedback, it would be much more difficult to create a very effective transit system for the Cowichan Valley. So thank you, and look forward to I'm available to answer any of your questions.
All right. The PowerPoint's gone. If I can invite board members to turn their cameras back on. I already have a brief list of people who want to speak just in the room here, and I'm going to add Director Smith and Morris and Nicholson to that as well, but we'll start with Director Stone.
Well, the presentation and the plan is sort of a tale of two stories to me from our perspective in Ladysmith. And it just seems like there's a bit of a disconnect between some of the planned investments and some of the recommended actions. I'm very pleased with, obviously, the introduction of the 70 NCX service, although the cost is quite high for people in Ladysmith wanting to get to Nanaimo and or Duncan. And we do have the duplication of the Ladysmith Duncan, what was meant to be a pilot project that seems to be continuing despite the redundancy with the interregional route. Really supportive of the idea of a transit exchange. There's a lot of opportunities with close highway access and good connectivity in Ladysmith to support that exchange. But then on the flip side of that, we're talking about on-demand reduced service for the local routes. When we made the change to the funding formula to go to an assessment-based contribution, Ladysmith took on a very dramatic increase in the annual contributions to the service. And we're thankful for the interregional route, but now we're talking about limiting the local routes when in fact our community has been asking us to expand local routes that were cut to pilot the Duncan Ladysmith Express. If the interregional route were more affordable, we could see, and the timing was done as such, and the location of the stop, where people could actually use the local routes to connect with the interregional route and not have to pay another fee to get on that bus, we would see a lot more ridership, I believe, in the local routes as well. So it just seems to be a disconnect in rationality when it comes to the cost burden that the town has taken on to become a more full partner in transit, and things like the transit exchange and the implementation of the 70 NCX route, but then contemplating reducing local service that has already been reduced because we wanted to pilot this Cowichan Ladysmith express route. So I think there's still a lot of unanswered questions here, both in this presentation and in the report. And I'd like to see us have a more full understanding of that sort of disconnect that I see in the plans moving forward for the Ladysmith area. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Stone. Director Yandy DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Thompson. I have a question on the Arbutus Ridge. I thought you can refresh my memory that we did do where we tried service to Arbutus Ridge at one time, and it wasn't taken up very well. So if you could refresh my memory on that. And also, I have two questions, because Cowichan Bay, of course, they pay into the service, but we just have this, there's no other, we just do one straight shot down a little road, right, is the way for us. And I guess that there's nobody that wants to go in any other directions, but what we wanted to do is speed up the transit, get people used to it, and start with the main spines. But Arbutus Ridge is kind of off the beaten track, and I wondered if there was historically some Arbutus Ridge, we did a transit there at one time, or is it currently there? And I think it was through Braithwaite Drive, if I could have someone.
Mr. Wright.
Mr. Sebring, I can answer this if you like. It's Jim. Yes, we still do provide service to Arbutus Ridge. It is a low ridership route, and it was all part of the coverage ask of the director at the time. In there, it's carried on, and that one we continue to monitor. Again, we're always trying to balance coverage with efficiency, and it's two opposite ends of the spectrum, right? But to answer your question, yes, we do provide coverage.
Thank you, and sorry, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
I understand that is not, that's been quite a few years now with the Braithwaite Drive that has not been used, and I actually get complaints from people that you have a bus going down here and there's nobody on it. So I wonder how long do we wait when the usage is not very high, and now I'm seeing that you still, I don't know if that goes to Arbutus Ridge, because Braithwaite Drive is close to Arbutus Ridge, but I just wonder how long do you wait with no riders?
Mr. Wakeham.
Thanks. I can try to answer this. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Mr. Thompson or even Rochelle Rondeau, who's also on the call. I think it's all part of the study that we're going to do in the south end. This point you're raising, Director Yanni Denaro, is also the same that Director Wilson has raised a few times. It is an ongoing challenge. It's all part of the type of vehicle we have. We do not have small buses that can run in these sort of rural areas, if you will. That's a whole separate issue. But my take on this is that'll be relooked at again when we look at the south couch and redesign how we can make improvements. Mr. Thompson, if there's anything to add, please do so.
Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, so Mr. Wakeham captured the issue pretty good. In terms of the service to Arbutus Ridge, we will be looking at switching it to potentially to on-demand service to address some of that low ridership, because we currently do have several trips that do go out to Arbutus Ridge. And we are looking at, we would be looking at the routing and the coverage areas as part of the South Couch and Local Area Transit Plan. So that would be something we'd be starting again in the new year.
Director Yanni Denardo, one final follow-up.
Just wanted to thank them. Thank you.
All right. Alternate Director Manhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson, for your presentation. I've got three questions, brief questions. How has the uptake been on the Nanaimo commuter route? First question. Second question, any plans to have service to the Duke Point Ferry Terminal? And three is Route 3 Quamich, is it being discontinued because of low ridership? Because whenever I drive down Maple Bay Road, there's usually nobody on that bus or very little ridership. Thank you.
Thanks. I can maybe shift some of the questions to Mr. Wright about the Duke Point service. I don't believe that we would have any plan. There's no current plans for that. And ridership on this NCX has been good. It's been increasing since incroduction, and we're hoping to see a further increase this fall. We're still waiting for more data to come in before drawing any conclusions. But September is typically our busiest month for transit, so hoping to see good numbers. About the 3 Qualgen, we are looking at possibly discontinuing it because we would be replacing the service with hopefully a more efficient routing, which would encourage more riders. Currently, it kind of does a winding and staking route through Duncan. So by making it more, making a service that's more direct and quicker, with more frequency, we'd be hoping to increase the ridership by significantly changing the route.
Thank you very much. I will go to Director Smith. Director Smith, are you there?
Yes, I do apologize. Thank you. Through the chair, I'm not sure. I have a few comments and a few concerns. When you look at the Ladysmith Saltaire figures, I reached out to Mr. Wakeham to sort of find out a little bit more information as to why Ladysmith and Saltaire were a slash and grouped together. And it turns out that we were lumped together with Ladysmith because of a 3-digit postal code, V9G. But a postal code is a 6-digit item. And it would have been easy to somehow differentiate the needs of Ladysmith that were in that survey and Saltaire. I've been the director for Saltaire for 4 years. I've had one person contact me regarding transit and one other person during COVID, and the solution was looking at a bicycle to get to the grocery store or delivery service from 49th Parallel. So I don't feel that the measurement is accurate enough to all of a sudden pop in an additional vehicle. There was in the survey no indication of cost. And if you want to go through Saltaire's list of increased costs, we're looking at a $5 million dam that we're going to share with the town of Ladysmith in the event we don't get a grant. We're working on the filtration system. We're doing our distribution upgrades. We're looking at an increase in regional recreation. And I think that the taxpayers of Saltaire just are being bombarded with additional tax, additional tax, additional tax. So I'm not really supportive of this initiative at this time. I think that what we should be looking at is a on-demand service for Saltaire. I know the community. People are looking to go possibly to Ladysmith, but this route has them going to Duncan. They might go to Chemainus, but we're 5 kilometers away. Connecting to the bus that's going to Nanaimo would probably more accurately reflect the community. I would like to see this initiative to include Saltaire removed at this time, as it's not something that we've even explored.
Thank you, Director Smith. Director Nicholson.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Given, I guess I got 3 questions, three questions. I'm going to start with the first one, which was you talked about there being 6% growth since the 2012 plan, and I'm wondering where that growth has been.
In terms of ridership?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that number is system wide. Are you looking for specific routes? I don't have that information right on myself at the moment. I could look that up and get back to you about how each route's changed over that time.
Well, I guess where I'm going with that is I'm wondering how much of that would be the new commuter service, and how much of it would be local.
Yeah. I could separate those numbers out. I just don't have that right on me at this time.
Okay, so the second question is, there's no talk about electrification, and I'm wondering where that fits in to the long-term planning for you.
Yeah. So that is something mentioned in the full version of the plan. We do have our low carbon fleet program, which is looking at electrification at a kind of that provincial level. And that's an evolving process. It's first going to get launched in Victoria, and then as we look throughout the province, it'll be expanded. But yeah, it is one of our corporate initiatives moving forward.
Okay, so I mean, our goal is to try and get people onto transit and out of their cars, both from a traffic perspective and just because it's more environmentally friendly, I would hope in the long term. So I think it's really important to understand, to me, it doesn't seem like we've likely increased ridership a lot. We provide commuter service now, which is great. But I am wondering if there's a way of doing more active engagement with the broader community, like targeted. So areas that we know that we could probably do some sort of a ridership and then direct our services there instead of always doing this sort of, I get that we're a big largely a big rural area, and we're trying to provide basic service to everyone, but it seems like we're doing that now, and that maybe we should be targeting at getting people out of their vehicles a little bit more. And you know, when I think about the way that you frame the engagement, I am not clear. I mean, my community I think is obviously lumped in with Duncan, but it seems like we do a lot of talking to existing riders, which is great, but we really need to attract the new riders. And so it's how can we reach them and target the most logical areas to increase ridership?
Thank you, Director Nicholson. Is that a question or just a recommendation?
Yeah, just I would be interested in staff thoughts on that.
Sure.
If I could, respectfully through the chair, I might provide a bit of comment. I wanted to comment on electrification of our fleet as well as perhaps service to, pardon me, electoral area E as the question pertains. On the point around electrification of our fleet, I think we have a team of engineer consultants working across the province at identifying properties that might be ready for early adoption of electric fleet. Locations where we own land and can set up BC Hydro infrastructure to support placement of BC Transit infrastructure to charge buses. One bus charging overnight is about the equivalent of 70 households, so it's a lot of electricity it requires, and there's a lot of infrastructure requirements that's required to support that. So that's the process that's underway right now. We have a commitment to totally go 100% electric fleet by 2040. We're still have confidence we can reach that target, and we in the next 2 years will be starting to roll out electric buses across the province. We don't have a timeline, unfortunately, at this time for Cowichan Valley where it fits in that process, but because we already have a facility that should be helpful. To the second point, I think that the South Cowichan local area plan that Aaron referenced is sort of the strategy that identifies this. And I just wanted to identify that that there's always this tension, especially in a large regional district, rural area, where low density predominates. Transit provides a critical lifeline for marginalized communities and people that don't have transportation options, whether they're kids or seniors that are aging in place. And there's always that tension between providing high ridership corridor commuter routes that will get people out of their vehicles and really shift that mode, and the lower ridership coverage routes. And so this plan focuses perhaps more heavily on providing that coverage service throughout the Cowichan Valley. But certainly we've done a lot of work on those high ridership commuter corridors to provide great interregional access, I think, between Cowichan Valley and south to Victoria, as well as up to Nanaimo.
All right, thank you very much. I have Morrison, Wilson, and then Yana DiNardo wants to speak a second time, but I'm going to see if anybody wants to jump ahead of that, and I'm going to put myself on the list as well. I see you, Director Smith. Director Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so I have one suggestion, and I'm not a transit planner, so I'm sure they've considered this, but it's in regards to the, and just a comment maybe to Mr. Wakeham afterwards, but in the internal loop proposal, I noticed you've got the vehicle going up and down, I call it Government Hill, but up towards the hospital. And it seems to me that there's what would be a perfect internal connection to that from through the back of Duncan, up through Cairnsmore, past the hospice house, through the school zone area there, and then up to the hospital. So I'm sure that you planning folks have looked at that. If you have, and it's not appropriate, love to know why not. And my second question or comment, and also the fact in that one, it's really important, even when the hospital is moved to a new location because of the medical specialists that are up in the Gibbons Road area. I think we're probably going to have a fair bit of traffic through there. Second question, through to Mr. Wakeham. We used to talk about this quite a bit, where $1.50 or $1.50 a liter was that tipping point that was going to drive everybody out of their cars onto transit. We wouldn't have enough buses to carry the loads. Is there a new number, $2, $2.50 a liter, before we think that's going to happen? Thanks.
Mr. Wakeham.
No, there's no new number identified in that regard.
And as far as the route, which I presume would be up and down Jubilee Hill in Duncan, is that hill a problem? I mean, it's pretty steep. I know we run toboggans down there in the wintertime.
Yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, we had our safety and training officers do a route test to make sure everything was A-OK and safe to go. The reason we chose going up and down that hill over the Cairnsmore direction is that we have some service that uses Cairnsmore already. So we thought that by going up and down that hill area, we could add new areas of coverage for additional transit riders. So that would get them into the community where they currently don't have any service.
All right. Okay, I've got Director Wilson, then McGonigal, and I'm going to put myself on the list, and then we start round two. Director Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is an important one, obviously, and to be perfectly honest, to comment, this should have been in a separate meeting, not as a delegation, because it's been going on and on for far too long already. As a comment, I think in this particular case, as far as Arbutus Ridge is concerned, there are people who have to go into Arbutus Ridge to work, and that's the purpose of the buses. One of the things I've never yet, I'm afraid, got a satisfactory answer as to why we have to keep running these huge buses with next to no people on them. There has to be a much better way of doing this with smaller buses. And again, Mr. Wakeham has tried to answer this question for me, but it still doesn't make any real logical sense to me. But the point is, with Arbutus Ridge, there are people who need to get in there to work, and that's the only form of transport they've got. So let's go back and ask a question. I can see you getting impatient there. I will ask a question, which is basically, when are we going to get the buses which suit the routes, as opposed to saying, well, you know, we can't do this and we can't do that. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to ask Mr. Wright to answer this question. It's not a simple answer. All I can say is that we currently have 12 or 10 vicinity buses, our larger buses that run in the conventional system. They are about 3 to 4 years old. They still have 7 to 8 years left on the amortization of the lease of the buses. So that's number one. We're stuck with a lease to deal with these buses. Number two is, even to get a bus, you're looking at 18 months. So you can't just put a bus on the road next year. And BC Transit is working through this challenge right now of getting towards lower fossil fuel buses, so getting into CNG, ultimately getting to electrification. So they're caught in a bit of an awkward situation now. You don't want to be bringing in any more diesel or regular gas buses when we're moving towards that way if we can. But Seth, can you please try and answer the dilemma we have with our routes and our how we use our buses that go through some rural areas, but then the bus later in the day turns into a different route that is a much higher ridership that needs the capacity. Maybe you could please help explain this for Mr. Wilson.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And through the chair, just for context, we have 5 light duty buses, and as Mr. Wickham said, we have about 10 medium duty buses, medium duty being a combination of 30-footer and 35-footer. And so we also, in bigger urban systems, and on the commuters, we run which are 40-foot buses. So that's the normal big urban bus. So we don't run full-size buses on these community coverage routes. We run medium and small buses, the light duty bus being our smallest bus in our fleet. The way transit operations functions is that paying a driver and operating the bus and paying for the gas ends up being a lot more than the capital costs of the vehicle, especially the way BC Transit has structured the lease fees for vehicles. So while we can certainly shift more service to light duty bus, we would see very marginal savings, if at all. The result of that would hamstring and limit our ability to achieve operational savings through interlining buses. So right now, a route 3 doesn't remain as a route 3 all day. It's not one driver just performing that route. Aside from the driver being inanely bored from driving the same route all day, it would really reduce operational efficiencies. And so buses are interlined, which means that our scheduling team uses fancy software to achieve operational efficiency, and the bus goes from one route to another with about 15% schedule recovery time in between to achieve that operational efficiency and maintain a little bit of flexibility to catch up when there's traffic delays or construction or that sort of thing. So the way that the system is structured, as Mr. Wakeham's indicated, the bus will operate one route and then go to another route throughout the day. And while some service going into Arbutus Ridge might have lower ridership, just 1 or 2 people on the bus, later in the afternoon at 4:30, when it's serving higher ridership route, there'll be lots more people on the bus. And if we were to go to all smaller buses or a higher proportion of smaller buses, we'd really limit our capacity on those higher ridership peak times of day. And so we're keen, and we've understood that this is a concern, and we've identified it, and we can continue that conversation, and we'll monitor our ridership per trip going forward. But at this time, we feel like the fleet mix in the Cowichan Valley is appropriate for the entire system, keeping in mind those cost efficiencies.
Follow up, please, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Go ahead, Mr. Wilson, Director Wilson.
Thank you very much. Let's go back to the phrase marginal savings here. Doesn't matter whether it's marginal or not, it's a saving. So we should be looking at that. Now, one more question then. Are we now looking at our future planning towards planning in the smaller buses, or are we still going to go for these large people carriers which run empty most of the time?
Seth, can you please answer that?
Sure. I'm not sure I can say much other than this is something we can continue to do some financial analysis and share through staff to the board at a future date. This is something that will require some investigation and cost analysis, which I'm sure we can support through Mr. Wiggin.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Okay, I'm going to move on to Director McGonigal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, thank you very much for the presentation, gentlemen. Very encouraging news and some of the improvements that you have suggested. I'm going to speak specifically of Lake Cowichan and surrounding area and the expansion of some of the services that are considered within that. As we move forward trying to reduce GHG emissions within municipalities, sometimes upwards of 82 to 84% in transportation, connectivity to those commuter routes is imperative to get people out of their vehicles, I believe. And I'm hoping that some of that 400 hours could be aligned with scheduling for the commuter to Victoria and the interregional service to Nanaimo connectivity. If you could comment on that, I'd appreciate it.
Mr. Chair, it's Jim. I can respond to this. So there's a couple things. You're actually touching on the next report, which is TIPS, which is the improvement for the 400 hours in your area. There's two things it's a fair comment. Number one, our commuter system, particularly to Victoria, starts very, very early. The buses are leaving at 5:30 to 6:30 out of Duncan. If we were to have every area, Lake Cowichan, Crofton, not South Cowichan, but the other ones that are further north, if we were to start our systems in time to have them connect into the local system, it would be a massive undertaking of time and costs, and staff don't feel at this time it's worth the area. Because just think about this, we'd have to start running buses from Lake Cowichan at potentially 4:45 or 5 o'clock in the morning. That's number one. So the intent, we understand it's an inconvenience for people that are away from the center of Duncan to get on the spine, as we call it, but you're not the only one. It's Crofton, it's others as well. So right now it is not. That's one of the reasons why we are suggesting we're going to we're going to reallocate an early morning trip going to Victoria later in the day. It's one of the recommendations, and so that would be at about 9 o'clock to help for some of those people to hopefully connect and go into Victoria. Remember, the folks that are going into Victoria, the high majority are for employment. It's not for social other reasons. Those generally take place on a Saturday. However, we also have a successful service now starting going north to Nanaimo, and that is the intent again, is to try and provide service where we can connect better to there. So the 400 hours you're talking about, to answer your question, it is not targeted to start the local service earlier in the morning to connect with the commuter.
Follow up?
Just a follow-up comment, and therein lies the problem of municipalities and regional districts to try to meet those climate change goals and GHG reductions, removing people from their vehicles and getting them into transit. So I understand the complexity of the issues, but without that option, people will continue to drive, whether it's 234 a liter or 436 a liter.
Thank you, Director McGonigal. I'm going to put myself on the list here because I think the first round is about done. And I'm going to come back to 70 NCX and actually riff a little bit off what Director McGonigal was saying. If this is about reducing GHGs, once again, I raised this before when that route was implemented. If I have somebody in Chemainus who wants to go to Nanaimo, they got to burn enough gas to go to Duncan to catch a bus to go north, which is ridiculous, particularly when the bus goes right by Chemainus. I raised this issue then. I'm going to raise it again now. I was given a commitment that after a year or so we'd look at that. I didn't see it anywhere in the plan here to say, you know what, we're going to implement an extra stop on Smiley Road on the highway. People can pop up Henry and catch the bus there to go north to Nanaimo or south to Duncan. It absolutely boggles my mind that commuter route does not include one of the major population centers in North Cowichan, still doesn't. What's the status on that discussion. And I guess the question is to either Mr. Wakeham or Mr. Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can start with an answer, and Mr. Wright can fill in. So you're right. There's two things. One is the service has only been operating for 5 months. The intent, as we've said all along, is there'd be a full review done by BC Transit after a full year. We need to see how the service improves, hopefully, and changes for the good over the winter months. It's only been operation really over the summer month, number one. Remember that service is meant. I understand fully your ask. It makes sense. The service that has been designed is a limited interregional service. We want to limit the number of stops as much as possible to keep it a fast-moving route, as we learned the hard way with their commuter going to Victoria. I also understand BC Transit's been in touch with MOT, re the planning work at River Road, to request on our behalf a desire of a stop there. MOT understands our asks, and I think they're considering our options, but I know that they have a concern that there is a safety issue on the highway. They will not allow a stop to be on the highway, so I don't know if there is in the design plan some kind of a pull-off or a bus stop area where it could be constructed. And I also understand that intersection improvement is 2 to 4 years away. So
Just
that's
to be
my
clear,
understanding.
I didn't mention River Road. I mentioned Smiley. It's a quick pop off the highway and you pop back on at River when the light's there.
Sorry. Okay. And with regard to that, I don't want to say that there are complications with all of them. We looked at the co-op situation as well. Could a bus go through that? And there's concerns that I'm going to let BC Transit expand more on, because it makes for an awkward trip and it does potentially add the opportunity to pick up a few people. But I think my personal opinion is I think we need to provide better service from Chemainus to Ladysmith and have people connect there. Mr. Wright, have you got any further to add?
Sure, yeah, because we have had conversations with staff between BC Transit and staff at the regional district in the last week on this particular issue. It's come up through customer request wanting to get their son to Vancouver Island University in Nanaimo. And I live in the area, so I'm familiar with the area, and it is a long stretch on the 70 NCX. I think Mr. Wakeham's point around wanting to maintain the express service are key to this conversation. Nonetheless, we have identified this as a priority and something we want to work on. Conversations with the ministry just happened on Monday or on Friday this last weekend, and they were supportive of the idea of adding a stop and finding a good location. There are ideas around that River Road intersection renewal and signalizing that River Road intersection, that they would change the function around Smiley, so there might not be the same accesses. They're trying to reduce the total number of intersections, especially unsignaled intersections in that area. So we want to ensure that we don't create something that gets changed the following year. But certainly adding a stop around Chemainus is a priority, and that's something that we would look at for inclusion in next year's TIPS cycle. So when we present an expansion MOU, as you have as a second item on your agenda this morning for transit, we would look to include some extra hours that would be required for the Smiley routing, but we want to work with the ministry to ensure that it aligns with their plans and makes sense and is achievable to service the folks in Chemainus to get onto the 70.
Mr. Wright, I'm hearing you, and thank you very much. And I want to say this gently. I'm hearing from Mr. Wakeham, with all due respect, that there's all kinds of reasons we can't do this. I think we need to approach this from a perspective of let's find a way to get it done. And I would just urge everybody to continue down that pathway. Okay, we've been through the first round. We have a huge agenda today. I have 2 more speakers on this, and I'd ask you to, 3. Oh, Director Acton hasn't spoken yet. I'll let Director Acton go first, but let's try to wrap this one up because we got a lot more stuff to get through. Director Acton.
Thank you. I hope it's not redundant, or I guess my question is, or I just want to flag that when BC Transit's looking at improvements and recommendations for the South, that we look at reinstating, or at least looking at the information that's available from when the bus used to go on the west side of Shawnigan Lake. I've heard many times from the community that it's a shame that it used to go all the way around the lake and then now it doesn't. And being that we are, along with Mill Bay, the closest communities, close to the city, commuting is really important for our residents, and so is affordability, and having that service is really important. So it would be interesting, or at least I hope that will be explored and re-looked at.
Thank you, Director Acton. Directors Yanni DiNardo and then Smith to close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have to make this one comment. I will not be running any longer, but I will just want to repeat that when we did build the new transit facility, I, as a director, recommended that while we're building it, that we should put in electrification in the infrastructure, and I was told that we would be going to LNG. So it would be a really good suggestion, cost-wise, financially, that while you're putting in the infrastructure, that you also put in the infrastructure that you may use or may not use at the same time. It would be cost-efficient. Like the parking lot in Kerry Park, we actually put the infrastructure underneath the ground for electric vehicles if and when we needed it. So, those are things that I suggested. It didn't happen. We did manage to get one plug for staff, one electric car plug by the front office, and I just wanted to just say that again, that I hope that you're building facilities and looking at things that are 50 years out and not for the current times. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Yanni DiNardo. Director Smith.
Thank you. I'm not sure that I had my question answered at the very beginning when I spoke to the postal code lack of information to differentiate between Ladysmith and Saltaire. Creating routes without accurate information is detrimental to the CVRD's reputation. I think that there are people in the Ladysmith section that are on possibly Gill Road, Glen Road, Woodley Road, that would have also responded to that transportation. So before we move ahead with routes that say Saltaire endorse this or anything like that, we need the actual accurate data. It's like, let's take another remeasurement on this. You need to come forward with accurate information. I can't endorse something for a community without accurate information. And I think that the town of Ladysmith, works very hard to have transportation within their area, and they may need to look at also servicing some other areas. So until we have accurate information, I can't support anything that has been done in these documents for Saltaire. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Smith. Seeing no further hands, we've had a good discussion on this. Thank you, and thank you to Mr. Wright and Mr. Thompson. I gather you're going to stick around for some of the...
Excuse me, I asked a question, please, Chair. Can I have a response with regards to how we can have accurate information when you start grouping it based on a postal code?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear a question. I heard a statement, but now I've heard a question.
Yeah, it was at the beginning.
Mr. Wright, go ahead, or Mr. Thompson, or...
Yeah, thanks kindly, Chair. And respectfully, I think that this is an error in the way we carry out our engagement in rural areas, and obviously it's based on postal code prefix because of the way the sort of our engagement platform is structured. That's how it organizes the survey responses. I don't think we're sort of at a point where we'd necessarily want to go back to resurvey under this process. We have identified that response level was quite high in Saltaire, and that was something that our previous planner who did that engagement identified and reviewed the data, because that was a question because of that postal code prefix issue. So we did identify it as an issue, and going forward, we can ensure that our engagement in lower density places where postal code prefixes cross jurisdictional boundaries, as you're highlighting, can address that issue. I'm not sure that certainly we can entertain a conversation around if you want that identification of a route removed, but the plan is an identification of what we heard through public consultation and what our professional planning staff, in this case Aaron Thompson, has identified as as recommended opportunities for growth. But the plan is politically agnostic and doesn't take a political stand on issues. The political process that you have at your disposal to really implement service is through that TIPS process. So if Saltaire is not prepared for development of a transit route at this time, that can sit in the plan, and the rest of the plan can move forward through the TIPS process and through collaboration between BC Transit and the Cowichan Valley Regional District, and through that TIPS expansion planning process for service.
I would just add to that, Director Smith, I did see a footnote in the PowerPoint that said that the expanded Saltaire route is subject to Saltaire and your area joining in paying for transit in a more fulsome way. So at the end of the day, you as a director, I think would still have considerable influence, if I can put it that way. Maybe not a veto, but certainly influence in terms of how this thing goes forward. So.
Mr. Chair, if I may add a comment, it's Jim again, and just a little background here. The exploration of the service to Area G was part of the Transit Future Plan that was adopted in 2012. So there are a few items that still have not been implemented from that plan. Most of the short-term items have been, but that one and the circular route and a few other small ones is what we're talking about. And you're right, the caveat of needing the community to buy in is still very much alive. So this is not a forcement of service on the residents. I personally have done a presentation out there a couple of years ago, and I heard quite strongly that the majority were adamant against it and they didn't want it at the time. But remember, when we did the survey, we asked the board, we wanted this to go across the entire CVRD. We did not want to go just into the regions that currently have transit service, so that's why they were included. But I'm glad you pointed out the postal code issue, and BC Transit is aware of that going forward.
All right. And on that note, I think we're done with this discussion. Again, we have a very hefty agenda here. I'm going to turn to Mr. Robbins, and we did have a motion earlier to alter the agenda to move R12 up. Mr. Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. R12 is a report from Strategic Initiatives Division with regards to a telecommunications antenna structure policy.
And I believe there's a recommendation there. I'll read it.
Sorry.
That it be recommended to the board that the CVRD telecommunications antenna structure policy be approved. And that's moved by Director Stone. Oh, is that a motion, Director Stone, or you just? I'll put it on the floor. Okay. Director Stone moves, Director McGonigal seconds, and Director Stone wants to speak to it. Director Stone.
So I'm definitely not insensitive to the ongoing and emerging science around the impacts of wireless technology. I've worked in the computer industry my entire life, and I do take precautions in my home and in my business to protect myself and my staff and my family. That being said, I also recognize the necessity in today's world of good connectivity, safety, security, economic opportunity, and equity for folks who really feel they need that service. But more than that, I also respect the limits of our authority and jurisdiction. Having been through this in our community, I do want to note, actually, as we sit here in the meeting, my phone has got full 5G bars, and it is prevalent within the region already, and there are gaps in the service. But again, the limits of our authority come down to recommendations around siting, not final decision-making unless it's on municipally owned property, and providing feedback and allowing us to get feedback from the community to forward on to, I always lose the name, Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada, who does make the final decision. And I'm often struggle with this in my term in government for 8 years now, that we get the bulk of the feedback from community members asking us to stop things we have no authority or jurisdiction to stop. We have in the past, both at this table and at our municipal tables, given feedback to senior government and proponents about siting of cell towers and our own concerns and our suggestions. But in the end, those decisions are made by a higher level of government, and we're not authorized or empowered through legislation to actually stop the placement of a cell tower. We can only provide input and feedback, gather input and feedback from our communities and forward those along to those who make the ultimate decisions. So I just want folks to know that I don't think anyone around our tables is insensitive to these issues. We've heard from all sides of these equations over the number of years since in my time as an elected official. And we do forward all of that feedback to the powers that be. But in the end, it is not our authority to be able to refuse placement of telecommunications infrastructure. That is the federal government's responsibility. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Director Stone. I see the author of the report, Ms. Garnett, has popped up. Did you have something to say?
Yes, thank you. I do have a presentation if the committee would like to hear it, just to introduce the policy.
I wish somebody had told me that. I didn't know. I'm sorry. I did not mean to overlook you. Director Nicholson, you're next on the speakers list, but let's have a quick look at the presentation first. Ms. Garnett, go ahead.
Great, thank you. I'll just share my screen. How does that look from your end?
Looks great.
Great. Okay. So, yeah, thank you for hearing my presentation. So, my name is Allison Garnett, and I'm presenting on behalf of the Planning and Strategic Initiatives Division. So, our division was tasked with developing a policy for the electoral areas for telecommunication antenna structures. This work included understanding the roles of local government and federal government, as well as internal discussion with CVRD Emergency Management, as well as economic development, who have been undertaking an internet and cellular connectivity strategy, and of course the legal review. The purpose of the policy is to clarify the board's jurisdiction with respect to telecommunication structures, to outline a consultation process specific to the CVRD's electoral areas, and to provide siting and design preferences. And this presentation follows these 3 points. In terms of jurisdiction, the Federal Ministry of Innovation, Science and Economic Development, known as ISED, has sole jurisdiction to license the operation of telecommunication facilities and approve the towers. Health Canada is responsible for health and safety. Local government concurrence or disagreement with a proposal is an influencing but not determining factor regarding the placement or height. On the second point of consultation, ISED has a default community consultation process, and this is the process taking place thus far in the absence of a CVRD policy. Local governments can establish their own consultation policies, but they must be reasonable, relevant, and predictable. The next slide provides a comparison between the ISED and the proposed CVRD consultation. I'll also note in terms of internal consultation, the policy requires early communication with CVRD Emergency Management to determine if there are co-location opportunities with emergency communication systems. So this slide offers the comparison between the default ISED versus the proposed CVRD process, including for proposals on CVRD-owned land. The notification range in the default ISED process is 3 times the height of the structure, and this would be increased to 300 meters from the perimeter of the structure to increase the notification range. The notification range for the measured from the perimeter of the structure was chosen to allow for a consistent range, as there can be huge variation in the size of parcels. The means of communication is increased to include signage on location, newspaper ads to notify of public information meeting, which the public information meeting itself is an additional requirement. And then there is option for additional public engagement opportunities at the request of the CVRD board. And again, we're trying to increase the range of consultation. The final row, response to the public, refers to the ISED requirement for the proponent to respond to public questions within a certain time frame, and then provide that summary to ISED. The proposed CVRD policy requires that summary to be submitted to the board as part of the public record. The summary must include the record of attendance of the public information meeting, along with the meeting minutes, public comments, and response to the public comments from the proponent, as well as information demonstrating that the public comments have been considered and providing reasons for rejecting those requests for changes, if that's applicable. The board, of course, has the option of forwarding the entire summary to the ISED, and the rationale is to increase the direct communication between the public and the CVRD board. With respect to siting and design, it is important to note that local governments can have preferences but not requirements. There are, of course, varying perspectives on the appropriateness of locations of telecommunication towers in terms of perceived impacts and benefits. So this policy approach is citing with general flexibility, except for a requirement for 300 meters from schools, avoiding areas affecting public views and vistas, avoiding hazardous and environmentally sensitive areas, minimizing or mitigating tree removal, and screening and landscaping to minimize visual impact. Altogether, the draft policy is intended to strengthen internal and public consultation processes and has built-in flexibility. Note that the board does not have to adopt a policy. In the absence of one, the default ISED process is followed. However, the staff recommendation is to adopt the policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Garnett. That was a very quick and thorough run-through. Appreciate that. I will go back to my speakers list. I had Director Nicholson on it. Director Nicholson.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think this policy is overdue because it's proving to be a very hot topic in Area E, as you probably know. We had a connectivity meeting at at Cowichan Station a couple of weeks ago, and we heard loud and clear from the community members that were present that they are extremely interested in pursuing a fiber option strategy for connectivity, and they are opposed to cell towers in the community. So what I would like to say is I'm really applaud economic development for taking the initiative and sending out a notice about this meeting to all the people that were in attendance at the hub that night. I think it was really appreciated. I know they only got a short notice period, but we all only get short notice periods about what's on the agenda. So it's I think it's really appreciated that the community heard about this and we're able to come. So that said, I know it is a really controversial topic in the community. I feel conflicted about moving forward with this policy without more broadly canvassing the whole community as to where they sit. However, I do think we need to put a policy in place as soon as possible because we have another tower proposed just down the road from us, and it's important to have, I think, something in place. So I would like to comment specifically on the policy as it's written. I am very disappointed that it is, well, from my perspective, it is not strong enough in the actual citing, where you can put towers, the preference on where you can put towers. I've looked at North Cowichan's, I've looked at the Island Trust one, and I definitely think that it would be, we need to make this a stronger policy in that regard. Yeah, so I guess I would move a revision to the motion to insert the wording from 5.2 and 5.5 of North Cowichan's policy, because I think it does strengthen it in terms of residential being a non-preferred area of cell phone tower placement. Thank you.
Okay, that's a potential amendment to the motion, and I'm sorry, but I'm sure most of the board hasn't read the North Cowichan policy in the 5.2 and 5.3 or whatever bullets you reference. Can you be a little more specific? Do you have that in front of you so that you can read into the record what the amendment would actually be rather than referring to those points in the North Cowichan policy? I hate to be specific, but we need to know what we're voting on here.
No, I agree with you, and I'm just trying. I was going to refer this back to staff to strengthen it from that perspective, but I would also like to say that I was kind of surprised that the policy wasn't stronger in this, because in our draft MOCP, Modernized Official Community Plan, it does speak directly to trying to avoid residential areas. So this kind of came out of left field for me, and but I do think we need a policy in place very quickly. So I'm willing to go either way, whatever staff recommend. But the 5.2 in North Cowichan's policy reads, freestanding TASs, which is telecommunication and antenna structures, should be located more than 500 meters from any parcel zoned with a residential designation or comprehensive development designation. And 5.5 says areas for location should be considered in the following order of priority from encouraged to discouraged. A, transportation and utility corridors. B, commercial and industrial sites remote from residential areas. C is institutional sites, including those that typically require telecommunications technology, such as hospitals, etc. D, agricultural, forested, and rural areas. E, downtown or other commercial areas. F, parks, green spaces, golf courses, and sporting grounds. And G, adjacent to residential areas. So that would be the order of priority from encouraged through to discouraged preferences.
So then you're proposing an amendment to the motion that's before us to include those provisions. Is there a seconder to that amendment? Not seeing a seconder to that motion. Oh, is that a seconder, Director Salmon?
No, I think I was going to second a referral motion back to staff so we can have a chance to think about this a bit more.
So that's not a seconder to this motion?
Right.
Just to be clear. All right. Director Acton.
Yeah, I think the motion's come quite long, but I would also second a referral motion because I do agree with Director Nicholson on the just strengthening the residential component of it.
Okay, so we don't have a motion on the table to refer, but we have 2 seconders. Director Nicholson, you want it?
I'll move it.
All right, so.
A motion to refer.
A motion to refer this back to staff, and I have 2 seconders for that, so I'm not even going to ask for a raised hand. On the propriety of referral, anybody need to speak? Seeing no hands, I'm going to call the question on the referral. All in. Oh, Ms. Girolf, I'm sorry, I didn't see you there.
Thank you, Chair. I think it might be worthwhile if you're willing to have staff explain why certain aspects of the North Cowichan policy were not included in the proposed CVRD policy, and I think it sort of mainly stems from the fact that while we're sort of neighboring and close jurisdictions, they're very different in some ways, particularly in our land use composition, and so I think if you would entertain that input from staff, it might help the conversation.
Well, the North Cowichan proposal isn't really on the table. I guess I would sort of poll the board. Are we okay to hear this from staff? Because it's not really germane to the motion, but nobody's running screaming from the room, so I think we're good with that. So sure. Ms. Garnett, why were some of these North Cowichan specifics not included in the policy?
Yeah, thank you very much. We are aware of the North Cowichan policy and those citing preferences or hierarchy. I think the reason that was not carried over to the proposed policy is, for one reason, just the vast residential areas that we have within the CVRD. If we did not have cellular infrastructure within those, then those are the locations that we often actually want to provide connectivity to. So I think that's one of the rationales, and the other is to really emphasize that the policy looks to really strong consultation so that we are receiving the full breadth of public opinion on it, and then the CVRD board can then make a decision on how they're going to respond to ISED in terms of their concurrence or disagreement. Because there is such a broad range of perspectives on this topic, having a thorough consultation process and a good summary of the information that's coming back to the proponents and then to the board allows the board to hear the perspectives, but with a flexibility of citing approach. It's not necessarily built into the policy, but allowing for a site-by-site specific consultation process to take place.
Director Nicholson. Oh, Ms. Giroux first. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to add for the board's, actually for the committee's benefit, that it is possible to move forward with a policy and to make changes later on, or to move forward with the proposed policy as an interim policy, and still request further changes be made and amendments be made at a later date. So I just wanted you to know that it's not an all or nothing approach, that you have options.
Okay, thank you. We do have a referral motion on the table. Director Stone wanted to speak to it. Director Stone.
I was actually going to say what Mr. Rolfe just said, that perhaps this is better not referred but adopted with the following motion to consider amendments of the policy to strengthen it as Director Nicholson provided. That would at least leave the region with some strengthened policy around engagement and citing, and allow us to contemplate further changes without delaying the implementation of the policy as presented.
So procedurally, if the motion to refer fails, are you prepared to bring forward the necessary motions as you've just described them?
I could work on it, but I thought that what Director Nicholson was trying to move would have been suitable as a follow-on motion, but again, just a suggestion on the referral.
Okay, anything further on referral? Director Morrison.
Yeah, I was waving frantically before you accepted the referral motion, and
Sorry, sir.
I'll try and be specific to that. You know, we've heard from people providing input that we need a policy in place, and you know, I'm a little concerned in that this is a policy for our electoral areas in the region, and you know, the implication of amendments at this point, because I you know, prepared and read on the basis of what was here, had no indication that there would be amendments suggested. I know it's not on the floor right now, but I think that we should look at implementing approving implementing the policy and looking at changes, because the suggestions that I've heard about the North Cowichan policy would make it unworkable in my electoral area. I've got two small population centers. So I'm suggesting that we don't refer, that we entertain the motion, and then the subsequent motions that Director Stone is quickly working on. Thank you.
All right, so with that, we have the referral motion on the table. Director Nicholson, and then Kuhn.
Thank you. I can support this policy going in place as long as there's a time, we have a time frame for when the strengthening in terms of residential option comes back to us, because I really feel that if you do not discourage these providers from residential areas, that's the easiest route for them. And I think that we need to be clear to them that it is not the community, at least many people in the community are not comfortable with that, and they should be seriously looking at other options, because I don't think the easy route is the way to go on cell towers.
Right.
So is it possible for Director Stone to put a time frame in his motion, please?
First, we have a motion on the table to refer that we have to deal with. So let's deal with the referral motion. Director Kuhn on the propriety of referral.
I'm not in favor of it.
Okay, that's pretty simple. Director Acton, did you have your hand up? Okay. Anybody else on referral? Seeing none, all in favor of referring this? And opposed? Looks like everybody is opposed. I didn't see anyone in favor, so the motion to refer fails. So the main motion is back on the table, that it be recommended to the board that the, where are we? Sorry, I'm on the wrong page. Recommended to the board that CVRD telecommunications antenna structure policy be approved. That has been moved and seconded. And on the understanding that I think there may be a follow-up motion coming here, that we direct staff to do some further research on this policy for the next board, but we don't append that to this motion. We just will understand that that's coming. I'm going to call the question on the motion that's here. All in favor? And opposed? That motion carries. No one opposed. Director Stone, have you crafted something?
I'm trying to find what Director Nicholson already has, so I haven't been able to craft a motion because I'm trying to find.
Okay.
I would recommend that Director Nicholson's proposed amendment was a suitable framework of a motion.
I think more generally, and Director Nicholson, if you'll allow me, and I've kind of been scratching some stuff down here too, that staff be directed to do further research on the telecommunications siting policy with an eye to restrictions that exist in the North Cowichan policy. And that's broad, and then they can come back and, I mean, they've heard the discussion, they know what kind of restrictions we're talking about. Would you make that motion, Director Nicholson?
Yes, but I'd like to add a time frame.
Okay, by what?
I don't know, but by December?
Okay, by the end of 22, sure, of 2022. All right, that's moved and seconded. Any further discussion on that? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion? And opposed? Staff has direction on this one. Thank you very much. And everybody's in the room here is telling me we need a break, so I'm going to call a brief break till 11:40. That's 13 minutes from now.
You guys look like you're having too much fun over there.
Way too, you should come in and join us.
I thought about it, maybe driving at lunchtime. Is there any good snacks?
Can you bring us food?
Right. Okay, you guys order it.
We're live, so enough of this banter. Before we return to the agenda, staff has informed me that, you know, we're going to run out of time here. We got an hour and 5 minutes left. R13 and R14 are two items that are okay to move to the October 12th Committee of the Whole. They're not time sensitive. So with the consensus of the board, unless somebody really wants to discuss them, I'm going to suggest that by consensus we agree that R13 and R14 be moved to the Committee of the Whole meeting for October 12th. I don't think we need a motion. We can do it by consensus, Ian. We're good. Director Wilson, you have something to add?
No, I was just moving the motion, sir.
All right, good. Okay, so that's been done. So I will now turn back to Mr. Robbins to Director Nicholson. I'm sorry, I didn't see you there.
Thank you. Well, I was wondering about R14 because it's for information, and I think it's a really important topic that maybe the new board should hear.
Well, so bumping it ahead to the 14th doesn't preclude us from bumping it ahead then to the new board.
Yeah.
We just don't want
Was that part? Was that one of the ones you mentioned? I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
13 and 14. All right, they have been deferred, so I would go back to Mr. Robbins to take us back to the agenda, and I think technically we're pretty much at the start of the agenda with R1, even though we've been here for over 2 hours. But go ahead, Mr. Robbins.
That is correct, Mr. Chair. R1 is a report from the Facilities and Transit Division with regards to Transit Future Action Plan 2022. The recommendation is that that it be recommended to the board that the Cowichan Valley Transit Future Action Plan 2022 be endorsed.
Do I have that motion? That's moved by Director Nicholson, seconded by Director Acton. We had quite a discussion on this with the delegation, but Director Nicholson, you wanted to speak, go ahead, and then Director Stone.
I just want one more clarification, and that is the Eagle Heights improvements are included in this. I noticed they're mentioned under financial considerations, but they weren't really highlighted today.
Mr. Chair, it's Jim. Yes, they are included in the Transit Future Action Plan as well as the TIPS, the report number 2.
Thank you. Director Stone?
Just following up on my comments, the from before, some of the stuff like is contemplated, not sort of directed in the action plan. Will there be further reviews and discussion of this plan as the implementation moves on? I'm mostly talking about a move to reduce service in Ladysmith. I'd just rather support this, but know that there would be further engagement on that as we move forward with measurements and look at opportunities to improve the service.
Mr. Wakeham?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Yeah, the answer is absolutely. The key is the 3-year rolling expansion plans that we go through every year. And we're going to do one, it'll be the next report. So every year we'll bring forth what staff are recommending for the expansions with full information so you can make appropriate decisions on that. That's how we would handle that.
Thank you. And just one follow-up, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, sir.
You know, and I've got a lot of feedback in the community, and I've tried to direct them as much as we can towards this kind of process so that we can capture it. But I would still argue that looking at the increase in ridership on NCX, that if we could look at a revised fare structure, we'd probably actually get more ridership, more than enough to compensate for a reduced fare cost. So I know it's complicated, Mr. Wakeham, you don't need to address it, but I'm just saying that the feedback I've received is that instead of the, reasonably good success we've had thus far, and we're looking toward this season of schooling, et cetera, to see how that really measures out, that if we're at 20% capacity at a rate of $7.50, that perhaps we can more than double that by reducing the fare and actually have better cost recovery on the route. So I'll just leave it there and I'll support this motion.
Thank you, Director Stone. Director Smith.
Thank you very much. I do not support this motion. I would like to recommend an amendment to the motion. And I recommend the removal of the introduce service to Saltaire, introduce transit service to Saltaire by extending the 6 Crofton Chemainus North. Introducing this service would be dependent on the Saltaire becoming a partner in the CVRD transit function. I would like to
Before you speak
make
to
that
it,
amendment.
I need a seconder. Is there a seconder for removing service to Saltaire from the plan? That would be an added bullet. Director McGonigal seconds it. Go ahead, Director Smith.
Thank you. I hear Director Stone indicating that Ladysmith has had reduced hours, and here's a service that has not been explored fully, and I believe that one vehicle and the hours would be better allocated into the Ladysmith section at this time. As you've said, we review this in a year. In a year, if there's an opportunity to have further explored this option, I would expect it to be back on the table. The BC Transit representative indicated that there was an error in our engagement when it came to the Saltaire areas. So I think that putting forward something that has been identified as an error by BC Transit is not the way we need to go at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Smith. Anybody else to speak to the amendment? See no hands on the amendment to remove the Saltaire service and to identify that as an addition to the recommended motion. All in favor? And opposed? Sebring, Nicholson, Morrison, Yana DiNardo is opposed. I believe the amendment carries. I'm sorry? Director Kuhn, you were opposed? I didn't see you there. So what does that give us for a count, Mr. Robbins?
Could I have those opposed again, please, Mr. Chair?
Those opposed, please raise your hands. So Kuhn, Morrison, Yana DiNardo, Nicholson, Sebring are opposed.
The motion passes.
The motion carries. So now on the motion as amended. Before I take board speakers. Mr. Wakeham had his hand up. Go ahead, Jim.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I jumped in a little early. I was going to add a second motion as well. I'll let you carry on with this.
Okay, thank you. So on the motion as amended, all in favor? And opposed? Sebring and Yanni DiNardo and Stone and Kuhn and Morrison are opposed. Sebring, Yanni DiNardo, Morrison, Stone, and Kuhn opposed. I believe that motion carries.
Nicholson as well.
I'm sorry, Director Kuhn?
Nicholson as well.
Oh,
Better
Nicholson,
put me as
Nicholson
well.
was opposed as well.
Better put me as well. This has kind of been thrown out there without enough time to
And Acton.
think about the consequences.
Thank you, Director Acton. I would turn to staff. Does that motion fail or pass?
I still have that as passing.
Okay.
7-6.
All right, thank you very much. So, Mr. Wakeham, you had a suggestion for a follow-up on this?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think it'd be really worthwhile if I can just interject with a new motion here, listening to the comments made. This has come up a number of times, and I think it'll be worthwhile if I may provide a recommendation on a motion.
Sure,
Is
go
that
ahead.
appropriate at this time? That staff be directed.
Sorry, those numbers are not right.
Okay, the vote has been challenged on the motion as amended. Can I ask those in favor to please raise their hands and keep them raised so staff can count?
Can you reread it again then, please, Al? Sorry.
Motion is, as amended, that it be recommended to the board that the Cowichan Valley Transit Future Action Plan 2022 be endorsed, but that the service to Saltaire as described in that plan be removed from the plan. That's the motion as amended. All in favor, please raise your hands and keep them raised.
And bear with me as I go through the squares just to check. Thank you.
Do you have all the in favors, sir? Please keep your hands raised if you're in favor.
I do.
All right. Opposed? Keep your hands raised until Mr. Robbins tells you to put them down. I count 7 opposed.
Correct. Mine
So the motion is
defeated.
defeated. The motion is defeated. All right, Mr. Wakeham.
Sorry, so you still have to deal with the original motion, which was without the amendment, and then I was going to add a second.
No. That vote was on the motion as amended. The amendment passed. That vote was on the motion as amended, which was defeated.
So that means that the resolution of the Transit Future Action Plan being adopted is not. Is that correct?
Is not. That's right. So
Okay.
the Cowichan Valley Transit Futures Action Plan 2022 has not been endorsed by the board.
Okay, so I guess my question is, what would the committee like us to do? If you want, one suggestion could be that staff there was a number of really good comments and feedback by directors. I appreciate that. So one motion could be that the staff be directed to review and modify the Transit Future Action Plan to include reference to the items expressed at today's meeting. It's fairly general. It gives us in BC Transit a chance to sit down, identify. I've got 2 pages of notes here, and bring it back to the committee at another time. Would that be an appropriate motion that somebody would want to make?
I think that would be a very appropriate motion. Director Morrison appears ready to make it, and Director Stone seconds. So basically, it's a referral back to staff that they come back with a new report based on the input they heard today.
Okay. Could I add a second motion, if I may, that is...
No, one motion at a time, Jim. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Director Morrison.
I'll wait to the vote. I have another comment.
All right. I'm going to call the question on this motion, which is essentially to refer this whole thing back. All in favor? And opposed? That carries. Mr. Wakeham, your second idea?
Thank you, appreciate that. The staff be directed to review the implication and costs associated with starting the local service early enough for routes to connect with the commuter in Duncan. This item has been brought up a number of times. I think it'd be a really good exercise for BC Transit to provide to us what would the cost be if we started the routes early, like in the Crofton area, as well as the lake area, so that they could connect.
I see two hands. Are those people ready to move the motion? Moved and seconded. Okay, so that'll become part of that report. Director Morrison.
Yeah, thank you. And kind of adjunct to this is I'd like staff to think about whether or not it might be time. I know we've just concluded this process, but it's clear from comments, not just now, but earlier today, that there seems to be a desire for a more robust engagement. And, you know, I'll hearken back to the days, there's not many of us around here that were there, but we took the Transit Future bus around to the local malls and you know, events and that sort of thing. I'm not suggesting that this be a 2022 or 2023 thing, but I think there's a desire to, you know, update and rewrite a little bit more robustly than the process that's just gone on. So I'd just like staff to hear that, consider it, and I'm prepared to support the resolution.
Right.
Thank you.
So the resolution on the table is about starting some services earlier to mesh with the commuter services. That staff report back on the feasibility. Seeing no further hands, all in favor? And opposed? Mr. Wakeham, you have your marching orders on that one. You just made more work for yourself. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I would go to Mr. Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Report R2 is from Facilities and Transit Division with regards to the proposed three-year transit expansion plan 2023-24 to 2025-26. There is a two-part recommendation that it be recommended to the board on September 28, 2022 that the three-year transit expansion plan for 2023-24 to 2025-26 outlined in the BC Transit letter of September 13, 2022 be approved, and two, that the transit service expansion hours and estimated cost for 2023-24 through 2025-26 be incorporated into the 2023 budget and five-year financial plan for transit budget functions 106 and 107.
Could I have that motion? There's been a suggestion that we ask some questions before we make the motion. Director Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Wakeham. I know that this is a commitment for the three-year program. When does this need to be signed? And what's the time pressure on this? I think we might need to contemplate this given what we just went through.
There is a recommendation that this go to today's board meeting, so I'm assuming there's a tight timeline, Mr. Wakeham.
That is correct. We need to give BC Transit a response by September the 30th so they can add all these in and present their ask to the province.
All right. Director Stone.
Just, has it been moved and seconded?
No, it hasn't.
I'm moving it.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. We've heard the timeline has to be done by September 30th, so there isn't even an opportunity to take this to the October 12th meeting. All in favor of the motion? And opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. Mr. Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. R3 is a report from the Facilities and Transit Division with regards to free transit fare policy amendments. Three-part recommendation that it be recommended to the board on September 28, 2022, that the free transit fares policy be amended as described in the staff report to the September 28, 2022 Committee of the Whole by one, excluding inter-regional services from free transit fare days, two, including reference to the existing transit assistance program, and three, inserting a new provision regarding distribution of complimentary tickets and passes at the discretion of the manager, facilities, and transit or designate.
That's moved and seconded. Any questions? I have one, but let's see if there's any other hands first. Just quickly on bullet 3, and I guess this is to you, Mr. Wakeham. Is there going to be some policy envelope around the discretion that's granted to the manager of facilities and transit or their designate when it comes to this? Or, you know, I can just sort of hear the dialogue in community. Oh, I know the manager over there can get free passes. I mean, is there some some kind of policy envelope around that in terms of what would and wouldn't qualify for the free passes, rather than just discretion.
That's a fair comment, Mr. Chair. I haven't given significant thought just specifically to that. Where this really came from was I know that most recreation departments, including the South Cowichan Recreation, they have an internal process, I'll use that word, not a policy, where they are allowed to give up to $1,000 in free tickets and passes for various recreation. We get the same type of requests. Various groups come to us and it's an opportunity for us to use it as an education tool or a marketing tool. And I realize after the motion was put forth, if the committee wished to add a dollar amount, $500, $1,000, that's their prerogative if they like. But no, I haven't specified exactly what it is. To answer your question.
Okay, no, I just wondered what that would look like, that's all. I'm not opposed to this as a concept, but I would just sort of flag it and say, you know, there does need to be some measure of visible controls on that, so it's not purely a discretionary thing with no, whether it's policy guideline or operational guideline that would attach itself to that, and that's something that could probably be implemented in the future. I don't think we need to make that part of the motion.
I appreciate the comments. I think it's very valid. The intent is to market transit. It's not for giving it away as gifts in door prizes. It's more about we want to give it to groups that are new to the area that have an opportunity to hopefully use transit for the long term.
Right. Seeing no further hands, I'm going to call the question on, Director Martman.
Thank you, Chair. And just through the staff, been listening recently about seniors and lack of support for seniors, and looking at what BC Ferry does. I'm wondering if there's any thoughts by staff on providing senior free days.
Mr. Wakeham.
We haven't been asked that before. That's an interesting suggestion. I guess I could look it up with BC Transit, see what other regions do if they do similar situations, and we can report back on the recommendation or the ask.
All right. Anybody else? I'm going to call the question on the motion. All in favor? And opposed? That motion carries. Mr. Robbins.
Report R4 is a report from Facilities and Transit Division with regards to the 2022 budget amendment for Function 200, Administration Office. The recommendation that it be recommended to the Board on September 28, 2022, that the 2022 budget for Function 200, Administration Office, be amended by 1, increasing revenue in grants general by $30,000, and 2, increasing expenditures in R&M buildings general by $30,000.
All right. Somebody want to move that? Moved. Seconded. Discussion. Seeing none, it's a quick in and out with grant money. All in favor? And opposed? That carries. Mr. Robbins.
R5 is a report from the Parks and Trails Division with regards to Function 280 Regional Parks 2022 budget amendment for North Watts Road parking lot and roadside trail connection project. Recommendation is that it be recommended to the Board on September 28, 2022, 1, that the 2022 budget for Function 280 Regional Parks be amended and approved to A, increase capital transfer and gas tax reserves by $103,594, and B, increase capital lease improvements by $103,594.
Can I have a mover? Moved by McGonigal, seconded by Smith. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor and opposed, that carries. Mr. Robbins.
R6 is a report from the Corporate Services Department with regards to asset management, GIS services need assessment. It's a multi-part recommendation. Would you like me to read it out, Mr. Chair?
Please do, sir.
That it be recommended to the Board on September 28, 2022, 1, that a grant application in the amount of up to $25,000 be submitted to the Union of BC Municipalities Asset Management Planning Program for the Asset Management GIS Services Need Assessment. 2, that the 2022 budget for Function 100 Asset Management be amended by A, increase provincial conditional up to $25,000, and B, increase consultants expense up to $25,000.
Moved by Yana DiNardo, seconded by Stone. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor And opposed? That carries. Mr. Robbins.
R7 is a report from the Emergency Management Division with regards to the 2022 Emergency Management Budget Amendments, Function 205. The recommendation that it be recommended to the board on September 28, 2022, that the 2022 budget for Function 205 Emergency Program be amended to one, increase provincial conditional grants revenue by $240,000, and two, increase contract for services by $240,000.
Okay, Director Stone moves, Yanni DiNardo seconds. All in favor? And opposed? That carries. Next.
R8 is a report from the Emergency Management Division, R9 is a report from Information Technology Division with regards to IT core infrastructure replacement. The recommendation that it be recommended to the board on September 28, 2022, one, that the 2022 budget for Function 100 General Government be amended by A, increase MFA funding short-term by $250,000, and B, increase capital expenditure by $250,000, and two, that short-term borrowing up to a maximum of $250,000 be approved for the IT core infrastructure server replacement to be paid back over 5 years as per the liabilities under agreement. Section 175 of the Community Charter.
Moved by Toporowski, seconded by Yanni DiNardo. I guess I have one question. Does this motion envision a total of $500,000 in expenditures? I've read the report, but just for the benefit of the public, because what we have here is $250,000 increase in MFA funding and capital expenditure, and then another $250,000 in borrowing. Is that 500,000 total, or is this the same 250 we're talking about in all the bullets? Ms. Mohan.
Mr. Chair, it's $250,000 total.
Okay, that's what I thought. Thank you. I just didn't want to give somebody the wrong impression that we're going down a $500,000 road for IT here. Any further discussion? Director Stone.
I'm just going to say for that budget, you can build a fairly substantial server farm. So hopefully it's a very robust system, because a data center could be built for that kind of expenditure. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Stone. Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So these kind of budget items, it would be nice for them to come forward when we're looking at the whole budget, because if we're talking about short-term borrowing, when it's a one-time purchase, we tend to look at our reserves sometimes to help balance the budget. So, I feel like this should not be an isolated expense that we're looking at.
Dr. Martman.
Oh, I thought I saw Ms. Mohan's hand up.
I'm sorry, Ms. Mohan, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to Director Acton. So we did put this in as borrowing. We took a look at general government reserves to cover this expense. So, and there is a little bit of room in our capital reserves that we could use, and there is some room in our operational reserves. But in using this amount from an operational reserve, it would bring us underneath the recommended parameters of the operational reserve policy, and so that's why we elected to put it in as borrowing. So we do have some options here. Additionally, we haven't had time to fully look at the Function 100 budget and see what kind of surplus we might be anticipating before the end of the year. So if there's any surplus in 100, we will be making use of that before we do any borrowing. But because this is such a core need for the organization, we really needed to just build in a contingency that if we can't do it with surplus, that we need to be able to borrow. So.
Director Acton,
we also think that the $250,000 is also an outside estimate. So we actually anticipate it being somewhat less than that, but in the current supply chain market and economic conditions, it's hard to predict exactly what it will cost. So we're trying to be conservative in our estimates about what it might cost.
Director Acton.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. We've seen affordability as an issue for years now, and it seems to be coming to, quite ahead. So if we can, we're not aware of how much we have coming back, but general government's our largest line item. I would suspect there could be 5 or 10% coming back into that. And that would easily cover it. So, and if it's bringing us, you know, how low is it bringing us for our reserves? So if it's an item that we're gonna pre-approve, I would rather see this come out of, that we use our carryover from this year and our reserves for the remainder.
Thank you, Director Acton. Ms. Mohan?
Thank you. Through to Director Acton, there is an anticipated need to actually expend the money in 2022. So this is not so much something that we can carry forward and do in 2023. There's a certain urgency around it, and that's again why we're looking at the potential of borrowing if we need to. The other thing is that with respect to the operating reserves, using the money out of operating reserves would bring us below the 4-month parameter in the policy, but it would keep us above the minimum 2-month parameter in the policy.
I've got Director Martman and Morrison.
Thank you, Chair. And I do echo Director Atkins' comments to some degree, but I'm struggling a little bit understanding the staff report, so maybe you can help me with that. Under financial consideration, it talks about a consultant-led risk assessment, cost estimate, and recommendations is underway and will not be complete in time for this budget amendment cycle. Isn't that, I guess I'm trying to understand how that relates to the ask for $250,000, because it seems to me without that information, it's hard for me to assess how critical this is. So the question to staff is,
yeah, I get the question. So through the chair to Director Martman, so the information that we're expecting from the consultant will help us help inform the extent and the cost of the proposed solutions, but it won't necessarily give us any more information about the urgency of needing to solve the problem. We already know that because it's based on what storage room we have left on our existing servers. So we know that if we don't do something, we will probably run out of storage room. That part we're clear on. The consultant has been engaged to give us options around implementing the solutions, the possible solutions, and implementing those solutions. And so we have engaged that consultant, and we are anticipating, had we had a report from them prior to the budget amendment meeting today, we would have put in a revised and more accurate figure, and it may have affected our recommendation to borrow versus using operational reserves, but we just didn't have that information. So, and because this is the opportunity right now to do the budget amendment, we don't really have another opportunity to come back to you later with more, with more refined figures or a different strategy. We need to build in the possibility of borrowing into the remainder of the year. So.
Director Martman, follow up.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And I gather, I'm using the term, maybe I'm incorrect in it, but it's a bit of a surprise item from my perspective. And I'm wondering how that's going to inform future, assessments of, these kind of cost items, because it would be nice to have seen this budgeted for and planned for. So any comment on that?
Through the chair to Director Martman, this was brought to the board earlier in the year.
In a closed meeting, as I recall.
In a closed meeting, yeah.
There were some security issues around this as well.
It was in late June, early July.
Yeah.
Thank you for prodding my memory.
Director Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's in echoing some of what I heard, I think that this report lacked some of the fiscal robustness that I think we would expect for a $250,000 purchase. I get that this has been laid out to us before. I get that the staff are trying to make sure they've got the flexibility to make sure that when they make the purchase, the funds are there. I do think, though, when it comes to those decisions as to dropping below the reserve minimums and the likes, that those are questions and decisions that should be brought to committee and the board to be made by us here. We have the ability to make those changes. I get that there's some time pressure here. I will support the resolution, But as I was reading this report, it struck me that, this seemed a little light on details and wouldn't be, or we would probably see more on the purchase of a truck. And as it turns out, the very next report is on the purchase of a truck, and it's a little bit more robust than this is. So with that, I'll support the resolution, and I hope staff get the message that we'd like a little bit more detail on something of this magnitude. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Morrison. Any further hands? Seeing no further hands, I'll call the question. All in favor? And opposed? Nobody opposed. The motion carries. Mr. Robbins, we missed one on the agenda. Go
We
ahead.
did, that was my, I breezed over that, sorry. R8 is a report from the Emergency Management Division with regards to Community Emergency Preparedness Fund 2022 Volunteer Fire Department Equipment Grant Application. The recommendation that it be recommended to the board on September 28, 2022, that a grant application in the amount of $72,449 be submitted to the Union of British Columbia Municipalities Community Emergency Preparedness Fund Initiative for the purchase of fire department apparatus equipment and wildland firefighting equipment.
That's moved by Director Stone, seconded by the chair. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? And opposed, that carries. Mr. Robbins.
And then that leads us to R10, which is the report from the Parks and Trails Division with regards to Function 279, the 2022 Capital Budget Amendment for Parks Vehicles. The recommendation that it be recommended to the board on September 28, 2022, one, that the 2022 budget for Function 279 capital budget be amended and approved to A, increase capital transfers from reserves by $12,389, and B, increase capital vehicles and machinery by the same amount, $12,389.
So moved.
Moved by Morrison, seconded by Stone. Discussion, Director Nicholson.
Thank you, Chair. At ABICC, I spent some time talking with other jurisdictions on Vancouver Island, and it's pretty clear that we would all benefit from having green fleet strategies, and that there may be an opportunity for us to work with other jurisdictions on bulk buying. And so I think it's way overdue. I was interested in bringing it forward, but I was told by staff that there was no capacity. But I would like to just raise that issue, and hopefully the next board, we can move that one forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anything else on this motion? Seeing none, I'm going to call the question. All in favor? And opposed? That carries. Mr. Robbins. Sorry.
Report R11 is a report from Facilities and Transit Division with regards to Nanaimo Cowichan Express. That's the NCX update. This is for committee information.
Mr. Wakeham, you had a brief presentation you wanted to make. I'm not sure if it's a PowerPoint or just an introduction. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, it's just an update here. BC Transit will provide a full report after 1 year of service, but in the meantime, we just wanted to give the committee a general update on how it's been going after the last 5 months of operating, and quick comments on ridership, bus stop activity, operations, and customer feedback. So the report, yes, it's just for information. I won't go into all the detail. There is an attachment that shows a couple different graphs here on activity at the bus stops. And remember that the route started in late spring. So unfortunately, the post-secondary schools were winding down. So ridership for that demographic was much less than expected. But overall, the ridership is steadily improving. The data that's presented is only up till the middle of August. We've got another 6 weeks after that. And we've already seen pretty good improvement in the month of September with the schools back in service. And we do expect this to improve over the next 7 months. There's some additional marketing that'll be going on as well. Midday travel in both directions has the highest ridership, especially on Saturday, which is not too surprising to us. It's pretty evenly distributed between northbound and southbound direction, which really has a slight preference, I suppose, for the northbound. The activity at the bus stops is pretty much what we expected, with activity at all the stops, but the majority of the southbound travelers coming from Nanaimo that are going to Village Green Mall and Ladysmith. On the reverse, the northbound riders, they're getting on it at all our stops, but mostly Village Green Mall, Duncan Train Station, and Ladysmith, and the majority are getting off as expected at the downtown Nanaimo Exchange. There's no operational issues to report. Operator says things are going well. Customer feedback has been positive in many ways. I'm not aware of any complaints, but yes, we've had a few inquiries or suggestions to add to improve the service, like a direct service to VIU and also to add the stop at Chemainus. With the university back in session, we're in the process of conducting some outreach sessions. They already started with VIU, and there'll be some new advertising as well. So just a quick update for the committee before we get a full data report from BC Transit in, I guess, to the end of 12 months would be up till April.
Just imagine how many more people would get on if we had to stop in Chemainus. I just had to say that.
Assuming we don't lose any because it becomes a longer trip, that's all.
Yeah. Director Stone.
Oh, I'm going to groan at that one, Jim. But imagine how many more riders we'd have if we could have a lower fare. But just getting my barb in there too, Jim. But I did want to say, I guess if we haven't heard from a lot of people about the fare, then obviously those folks I'm trying to direct to engage with transit staff or BC Transit directly aren't doing so. So I'll endeavor to forward those emails and comments and complaints that I get on social media when I get them, so that they're counted in the feedback. One of the out-of-the-box ideas that was brought forward to us, and I think it makes sense because it would only benefit Ladysmith, was to zone it southbound from Ladysmith at half the rate, northbound at half the rate, and full trip $7.50. But I'll leave it to a further analysis as far as we go, but I still maintain that if we could even drop the rates by even 30%, that we may get enough additional ridership to more than cover that cost and have better cost recovery and better ridership.
Thank you, Director Stone. Any other comments? This report is for information. It's been received for information. Thank you all very much. Mr. Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. R12 you have already dealt with. We're looking at the time at 12:20, and I look at you've deferred R13 and 14. You do have time, but more importantly, with some advice from staff, they'd like you to consider R13 because any delay in considering the motion recommendation in R13 will set back the Malahat First Nation, our partner in this service that's being introduced, to do what they need to do on their end. And so if it is consensus of the board to go on with R13, and it looks like you'll have time for R14 and of course R15.
And the two new business items.
And the two new business
I
items.
would, if there is that urgency, before we actually entertain the motion, I would insert in the motion that it be recommended to the board on today's date that the five-year
correct
plan.
That was what I was going to read
So
out.
it comes back to the board today. So go
So
ahead,
moved.
Director Robbins, or Mr. Robbins.
Was that a motion to see these or to this item?
Okay, let's just read the motion.
So
into the record.
that it be recommended to the board on September 28, 22, that a 5-year 2022 to 2027 municipal type service agreement with Malahat First Nation for participation in the CVRD curbside collection of recycling be approved.
And that's moved and seconded already. Director Smith.
Thank you very much. We are, most electoral areas are aware of the breakdowns that are occurring with our current vehicles. And I'm just wondering if there is actually the CVRD capacity to provide this service at this time and before we go into this agreement. Can staff please respond to that? Thank you.
Somebody on staff, please respond to that question about capacity and the vehicle issues that we have been having. Who wants to take this one? Mr. Elzinga, perhaps, or, oh, Mark
Mr. Boyson is there.
Mr. Boyson's popped up. Go ahead, Mark.
My apologies, Mr. Chair. Hope you can hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, sorry, I was our staff are just offline right now, but they're yes, we feel like we have the situation in better control right now. We have some solutions to the challenges we're having with our trucks that we feel like we're confident that we'll be able to provide this service. It will also take a period of time for the totes to be ordered and brought in, so it will be we do have some time to also keep working and correcting some of the challenges we're having with the vehicles, and hopefully have them all sorted out by then. So we think this is a very positive project to proceed with. Thank you.
So best case scenario then, just as a follow-up to that, when would be looking at actually implementing this, like next June? You know, do we have 8-9 months?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, my understanding is that it would be about 8 months for the totes to be delivered. So I don't have all the information myself, but I think that's the estimated time, and that's when we'd be able to proceed with the project.
Director Kuhn.
Yes, I apologize. I would like to just take this opportunity to publicly mention something. I've had an awful lot of complaints from my residents about the pickup of the garbage. I know that the 2 trucks broke down. We know that.
Order, Mr. Chair. No relevance to the resolution on the floor.
We actually have a motion on the floor, Director Kuhn. I understand what you're saying. We've all experienced the frustration.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that. It was a bloody mess.
We hear you. Thank you. Anybody else? I'm going to call the question on the motion. All in favor? And opposed? That motion carries. Mr. Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are going to still defer R14, so I'm going to move to R15, report from the Corporate Services Department with regards to Cowichan Housing Association, final approval, Duncan Manor Project Grant. The recommendation that it be recommended to the board on September 28, 2022, 1, that the 2022 budget for function 498 be amended and approved to A, decrease the Housing Trust Fund by $300,000, and B, increase grant to organization by $300,000, and 2, that the Cowichan Housing Association's request to disperse a previously approved $300,000 grant from the CVRD Housing Trust Fund to the Duncan Housing Society for the Duncan Manor Project be approved.
That's moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Nicholson. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor and opposed, that motion carries. We have 2 items of new business, which we're going to get to before 12:45. Director Kuhn, go ahead. And
I just wanted to quote that I'm opposed to this. I've been opposed against that housing project right from the beginning.
Okay. Director Kuhn's negative vote is recorded. Director Smith?
I would just ask for a tiny bit of clarification. So this is 300,000 and it says that the request for disbursement of a previous approved 300,000. So is this technically 600,000? I'm just wanting to make sure the way the recommendation reads. Thank you.
Somebody from Ms. Mohan, go ahead.
Through the chair to Director Smith, it's just 300,000. So the previously approved refers to the fact that the concept of giving the money for the project was actually approved in 2021 by the Cowichan Housing Society. Did I get that right?
Housing Association Board.
Association, sorry. That's what it refers to, but it is just a single $300,000 amount.
All right. Okay, so we move to new business. Mr. Robbins.
Thank you, Mr.
Yeah, we voted on it. It passed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first item under new business is the Kerwood Lydell addendum request, and I'm just bringing up the recommendation. That it be recommended to the board that funding required to the technical program for the pre-license applications to the province be approved up to a maximum of $100,000 from the approved 2022 budget allocated to the program from function 532.
Somebody want to move that? Moved by Morrison, seconded by Wilson. Discussion. Seeing no hands, all in favor? And opposed? That carries. Go ahead.
The second item under new business, there is a multi-part recommended resolution. I'll read it out. It is rather lengthy. But because this was added late, it'd be good to read this out. That it be recommended to the board that the 2022, number one, that the recommended to the board that 2022 budget for function 131 environmental initiatives be amended to: 1, increase provincial conditional grants revenue by 10,000, 2, increase project expenditures expense by 10,000, 3, decrease contract for services weir expense by $175,000, and 4, increase project expenditures expense by $175,000. 2, that it be recommended to the board that the 2022 budget for function 530 Cowichan flood management be amended to: 1, increase provincial grants revenue by $500,000, and 2, increase project expenditures expense by $500,000. And finally, 3, that they be recommended to the board that the 2022 budget for function 532 drinking water and watershed protection be amended to: 1, increase provincial conditional grants by $50,000, 2, increase project expenditures expense by $50,000, 3, decrease salary expenses by $100,000, 4, decrease water quality program by $50,000, and 5, increase contract for services by $150,000.
Okay, just to be clear, because this came as a late item, I'm assuming it's time sensitive. Is this again a recommendation that the board will consider today? Because you didn't read that into the motion.
No, this will be coming back. You noticed all the other budget amendments, so this will be coming back to the board with all of those other budget amendments that can be made with a bylaw amendment.
Okay.
And not later this afternoon.
Director Acton, are you making the motion?
No, I'm not. So this is a late item. Could we at least have that emailed to us? That was like a real, I don't feel comfortable. I don't know what I'm.
I believe it was emailed last night, Mr. Robin?
That's correct.
Yesterday afternoon it was emailed out.
Well, okay, so I'd just like, could we just have a minute so I could pull it up? I have not been able to catch up on all my emails since then.
I agree with that.
You know what? It's 12:30. Let's take a 5-minute recess to give people a quick chance to review this, and we will resume at 12:35, and we'll still be done by 12:45, hopefully, if we don't beat this up too hard in discussion.
Good job, Mr. Chair.
Still buffering. And we're live. Okay, we had the motion on the table. This was a late resolution that was emailed to the board late yesterday. Some people wanted to have a quick review of it. In discussion with Mr. Robbins on the break, it turns out this does have to go to today's board meeting. So the resolution would include the words that would be recommended to the board on September 28th on all the recommendations, so it can come back to the board this afternoon. Having said that, do we have any questions? These are all, from my understanding, in and outs with new grant money and new money coming in that's then being designated for expenditure. Director Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. The only thing I see there is on section recommended resolution number 3, 3.4, decrease water quality program by $50,000. What does that actually mean? I'm not happy about decreasing quality programs. Would somebody explain that one to me?
Can I have somebody from staff talk about that one? Kate Miller, welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the question. Happy to answer it through you to the directors. The challenge for us is that the budgets for 2022 have already been
We're losing your audio, Ms. Miller. Can you do whatever you have to do to fix that?
Can you hear me now?
A little bit, but you're fading in and out. But go ahead.
So because of various issues, we have not been able to utilize the entirety of the water quality program budget this year. and we can't bring in additional funding. So we are reallocating the funding that we would have spent on the spring and summer water quality program to support the existing requirement for additional funding at this time. So we're simply reallocating it during the 2022 period. We anticipate having the full program in place in 2023.
That's great. Quick follow-up, please, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Director Wilson.
Thank you, Kate. Yeah, but so what, if I understand that correctly, we're not actually decreasing the program. We're keeping it at levels that would normally you would have anyway, right? Okay, that's good. Thank you.
All right.
Yes.
Any other questions on the motion? Director Acton. Seeing Director Acton. Go ahead.
Thank you. Just for clarity, oh, shoot. Where is it? There's one wording in the motion. It's all grant funded. There's no, I guess with number 3 and 4 where it says decrease contract for services expenses, the 175, increase project expenditures expense. Like, is that being covered by grant funding? And because all the Weir items, we were originally told that we weren't going to be funding this as a region. So then now I'm just curious, is this burden on the taxpayers or is this completely grant funded?
Ms. Miller.
Thank you. Excellent question. In the early spring, summer, the board approved the CVRD spending some additional funding from the drinking water program, which would be from requisition to support the ongoing work of the license application. So that's outside of the grant program. The board made a supportive motion, but it was not a motion that included the direction to amend the budget. So that's what we're doing, is we're bringing it forward and we're amending the budget in line with the board's recommendation at the time. We also have an additional nuance with the Kerwood-Lytle report that we need to cover a projected deficit for the completion of that work. That can be within the original funding, but we have asked for some flexibility there because this is our last opportunity for a budget amendment. We're not anticipating that we're going to need the entirety of the additional 150,000, but we're still crunching numbers at this point in time.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. Director Kuhn.
I remember when the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Program was introduced to the public. It was again and again emphasized that we would not use any of that funding for anything that connects to the Weir. And that has changed since, and I've been against that all along. And I am not in favor of using any of that funding for the Weir, because as far as I'm concerned, the CVID should not be involved in the Weir discussion. We have no dog in that race. It's a province, it's a feds, it's a catalyst, it's a forestry ministry. It's let them fight over it. The CVID has no authority and has no input into the Weir. All we can do is recommend. We have no responsibility. We have no action on the water flow on the Weir. That's the Ministry of Forest. I just cannot see the CVID being involved in that. And I was against that right from the beginning, and I want to emphasize that I will not be in favor of any of these motions. We are making a big mistake as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you, Director Kuhn. Anybody else? Not seeing any hands. I'm going to call the question on the motion. All in favor? And opposed? Director Kuhn is opposed. Anybody else? Nope. Okay, the motion carries. That takes us to question period. Do we have any member of the public who needs to get up to the podium and speak? Come on up, ma'am. Give us your name again, and questions can be directed to the chair, and I'll try to have either answer them or send them off to staff for an answer. Go ahead. Your name, please.
Thank you very much. My name's Susan Kaufman, and I live in Satlam. I just have a question on R8. about the emergency management grant application of $72,049 from UBCM for fire department equipment. I noticed that Malahat, North Oyster, and Yubo were the recipient, or are to be the recipients. I'm just wondering, I'm not complaining that they are, I'm just speaking out on behalf of the Satlam Fire Department and where other fire departments offered the same opportunity. Thank you.
I would turn to staff for that one because I'm not real sure of the particulars. I know there were some grants that went to other fire departments, but can somebody on staff talk about how this is being directed to those three departments and not some others? How do we make those selections? Mr. Postings.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This application was reviewed by all 6 CBRD departments, and it was determined at this point in time the application would be moved forward with the 3 existing departments that were part of the report. So the intent is to continue to work with the other departments and look at other opportunities. But right now, that this grant fit best with those 3 existing departments that were part of the report, and that was supported by all the chiefs within the region.
Thank you, Mr. Postings and Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kaufman. Seeing no further questions, it is, look at that, 12:44 p.m. And there being no further business on the